What's the most horrific act committed by someone you know personally? Story 1. My father beat the crap out of my mother and myself when I was a toddler. I have an uneven skull because of it. Until I found out, I thought it was a birth defect. I didn't find this out from my mother until I was an adult when I had to take him to court because he had opened numerous credit cards with my social security number when I was a kid and had tanked my credit by the time I was 18. I have a similar story. My father would beat the hell out of my mother and me, choke her out, hold a knife to her throat, a gun to her head. My brother told me last year that his first memory is my father grabbing toddler me and holding a loaded gun to my head because he was mad at my mother. I always knew I had permanent lung damage from something. I've struggled throughout my life with respiratory infections because of it. COVID was super fun. I just never knew why. Apparently I had just learned how to walk 11 months. I grabbed my father's knee to stabilize and sneezed on him. He kicked the crap out of me and broke my ribs. I don't know more beyond that because it was too hard for my mother to talk about. Don't know why though, since she went back to him 3 more times after that until the cops finally put an end to it and removed me. Anyhow though, she finally told me a few years ago when I was 17 after a doctor asked if my ribs had ever been broken. That was a fun conversation. Hope our dads see each other in hell and that you and your mother are doing better now. For what it's worth, you sound remarkably well adapted for a guy who had his head caved in by his dad as a toddler. See, my dad died when I was young, 6 years old, and I hardly knew him. When I hear stories like this, I think I'd rather have no dad than have a complete waste of oxygen crappy dad, you know? My dad's death has definitely impacted my life in some negative ways, but he never ruined it. And if he'd been able to stick around, he would have been a good dad. It just pissed me off that these men, who are here and have the chance to be such a positive force in their child's life, go and choose to be deadbeats when dads like mine would have cut their arms off to be given the chance to stick around and be good dads. It's so screwed up and unfair. I'm sorry your dad was/is so crappy. No child deserves that. Story 2. One of my childhood friends was diagnosed as schizophrenic in his early 20s, went off his meds for a bit of a time, and had an episode. Bludgeoned his mom to death, who was my parents' friend. They found him in a fetal position crying and not understanding what happened. He committed suicide a few years later while in jail. That's so awful for everybody involved. Imagine your brain just suddenly turning on you and becoming your enemy. As someone with severe mental health, not schizophrenia, this reality is worse than you'd think. I woke up late one morning and was running late for D&D, so I forgot my morning dose. That one moment of forgetfulness fried my brain for the whole week. I wanted to die. I was paranoid, I was angry at everything, and I desperately wanted to go out and be a vigilante. I was ready to go get into fights because someone had a different political sticker from me. Missing 2 pills one morning did this. Unfortunately, this can snowball really quickly. Had my wife not caught it, I probably would have stopped my other meds, started having hallucinations, and could have easily ended up as a similar story. It's kind of the horror that's everyday life for mental health. One tiny slip in a daily regimen can cause so much pain. For me personally, my brain doesn't suddenly turn on me. I'm fighting it every day to stay alive. If you have a friend with mental health issues, reach out. Even if they're not having an episode, it can help. I'm bipolar and ran out of my mood stabilizers last week, and it was a stark reminder that I do not like who I am off of my medications, and that I'll probably be taking mood stabilizers / antipsychotics and antidepressants for the rest of my life, just to keep me stable enough to not be a POS to those around me, due to my own inability to regulate my emotions. I literally didn't sleep for 45 hours straight and my moods were everywhere. Accidentally missing a dose or running out of the meds you need to stay sane and balanced truly can mess with you so hard. A friend of mine who has schizophrenia did something similar. Beat down the door of his stepdad's flat in the dead of night with a cricket bat. He's English. And then stabbed him with a screwdriver and cut his throat. After that, he walked down to the local train station in the hopes of getting a train to Leeds and told a random person not to worry about the blood. He'd just killed someone. On finding there were no trains at 3 a.m., he went to a nearby taxi office and made the same announcement. explaining that he needed a taxi to his mate's house in Leeds. I'm pretty sure he was in the middle of a psychotic episode, and his idiot friend who he texted told him, "LOL, man, burn your clothes and lay low at my place." Both of them got jailed. From what I understand, his stepdad was a P-word who abused him when he was younger, but this wasn't brought up in court or used as mitigation. I'm guessing he didn't tell anyone when it could have helped his case. I only knew because he told me this years before in a drunken admission. Story 3. I lived down the road from Terry Joe Volner. He rode my bus every day and was also a violent, horrible person. He murdered a 5-year-old because he had feelings for the kid's mom, and I guess she didn't feel the same. So he murdered one of her kids, took a picture of the child's body, sent it to the child's mom, and told her he was going to kill her other kids that he was babysitting if she didn't come home right now. He got life. Then he beat his cellmate to death with his bare hands so brutally they considered the death penalty. It's insane how many chances violent offenders get to re-offend. Rarely is it a single event. There is usually a long history of offenses. I have a hard time with the death penalty, but I wouldn't mind if my tax dollars were partly used to keep these people off the streets for the rest of their lives. I was a probation officer in the 90s and had a client for misdemeanor domestic battery. He had previously been convicted of the essay of a 6-year-old child, got multiple decades of prison, and served 25. He had been out and off parole a few years when I got him. He told me that he was not a P-word and had no interest in children. He had R-worded the girl in order to get back at her mother for something, and that he would do it again. In 25 years as a probation officer and 40 years in human services in general, I have known maybe 5 or 6 people who were genuinely evil, and he was one of them. At what point, if we can't medically fix someone, do we consider it a lost cause? 2 life sentences are redundant. I understand the excess punishments to an extent, but there's literally no fixing this person. Why allow a threatening interaction every time you make contact with him? Even humanely speaking, is it better to keep someone alive when they are a constant threat to others? The problem is our justice system isn't just. People of color are less likely to be given plea bargains and more likely to receive the death penalty for similar crimes compared to white people. In addition, a lot of people on death row have been exonerated. That shows that our current system does not do a good job of separating the guilty from the not guilty. We also need to factor in the cost. It is actually cheaper for society to put them in prison for the rest of their lives compared from trial to death of a death penalty case. It's the above reasons that make the death penalty untenable in a civilized society. That unfortunately means some people don't get the death penalty. It's a trade-off. Would you rather have an innocent person executed or a truly guilty person not executed? Story 4. The guy I knew from Sioux Falls was convicted of many counts of R-word on a child. My kids had spent time with him. He was a family friend, and they called him Uncle. I had suspicions and cut off contact. A couple of years later, he was arrested and convicted. He was only interested in boys. My son swears this dude didn't touch him. I hope he rots. What made you suspicious? I had a coworker and her husband get arrested for the R-word of their kid, along with pornography and bestiality. She had offered to have her husband watch my son, who was the same age as hers. One day, when daycare was closed, I declined because her husband just gave me a bad vibe. Nothing specific, the dude just felt off. I knew some of their relationship history, cheating on both their parts, and always thought he was a D-bag, but this vibe was different. Like I just knew I couldn't trust my kid with him. If you've ever met a P-word, they give you the wrong vibe. It's like a natural instinct, but in reality it comes from the little things. They give your kids a weird, sensual hug that lasts too long. They'll bring gifts sometimes, give money, food, whatever. Or they'll look at the kids like a meal, like when you come home starving after a long day and your favorite meal is warm and ready at the table. Touching gets slightly aggressive, from grabbing a little too hard to touch their face. Story 5. A cousin had his 2 young children call their mom. They were divorced, and it was his weekend with them to say goodnight. He put them to bed and shot them dead before pulling the gun on himself. I used to work in a preschool, and one of the dads did the same thing. He was in divorce proceedings with his much younger wife and barricaded his doors before setting fire to his flat, killing himself and their 2 little girls. I hate the term extended suicide. The man was scum. I stupidly went and read some of the social media posts he wrote that night. and it was incredibly hate-filled and self-pitying in the worst possible way. Something similar happened to a teacher at my high school. She and her husband got divorced. He didn't want to, though. One day, he came to drop the kids off at her house, 8, 12, and 14 or something like that, and told them to stay in the car for a minute. He then walked up to the door, and when she answered, shot her, then turned the gun and shot himself, all with the kids watching. My father tried the same thing with my brother and I when my mom separated from him. Then he committed suicide. We were saved thanks to my grandmother, some neighbors, and the doctors. PD was a knife for my bro and a rock to me. We had the scars. Some people believe in the center of the universe, trying to hurt someone indirectly and cowardly. The good thing is that I don't have any feelings involved. My friend from middle/high school had this happen to her. She and her long-term partner, much older than her, had separated and were sharing custody of their 2 children. I believe she had started dating or didn't want to reconcile, so he shot both of the children and then himself. I've been through big loss and trauma, but her situation is one of the few instances where I'd consider eating a bullet. I have no idea how she gets up in the morning, let alone has rebuilt a decent-seeming life for herself. Dude was a coward and couldn't even face justice. And she'll never have any sort of closure. It's so sad that this situation is as common as it is. Story 6. My mother attempted suicide in front of me. She called me downstairs to witness her take a bottle of pills and then told me it was my fault. I was 9. She survived, but I've never been able to let that go. She still believes she's fine and everyone else is the problem. I have compassion for her, but I can't have her in my life. I'm a 42-year-old mother and I can't fathom doing that. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. My mother came home from 2 weeks in the hospital after a dramatic suicide attempt. She took a bottle of Valium, but it wasn't nearly enough to kill her. It takes a lot of benzos to kill you. And looked at me right in the eye and said, "This is your fault because you're a bad girl and I hate you." I was 12. You never forget a thing like that. I feel actual physical pain every time I think of her, which is less and less often now that she's dead. I'm as over it as I probably ever will be, but there really is no pain quite like the knowledge that your own mother doesn't even love you. Man, screw her. She didn't have the capacity to love. You could have been a perfect kid in every possible way that a parent imagines, and she'd still have said that. She sounds like she was filled with rage and hatred, and it has nothing to do with you. She saw you as an extension of herself because that's what selfish parents do, and so when she said that, it wasn't you she was talking to. It was about herself. Her words do not reflect who you are or how people are capable of feeling about you. I have a similar story. My mother didn't make me witness her suicide attempt, but when I was 17, I went to her house. I had moved out at 16 and noticed that she was really out of it. She was screaming awful things at me, so I left. When I went back the next day and woke her up, she started losing her mind, screaming that she wasn't supposed to wake up, and said that she had taken the perfect combination of pills that should have killed her. I was so angry that she wanted to leave me that I didn't talk to her for weeks. I ended up watching her die from an overdose later that year. My mom was arrested in front of me multiple times for refusing to show up in court for petty crimes that she had committed over the years. Once when I was around 10, I stayed with my grandparents for a week while she sorted out bail, and the 3 of us agreed that it would be a better life for me to live with them for a while. When my mom got out, I returned to her for the night, and we sat down and talked. I told her I didn't want to live like this anymore and that I wanted to live with Nana and Papa for a while. She started weeping and sobbing before she held up her wrists to show that she had sawed through them with a hair clip while in custody. She told me that she'd do it for real if I ever left her. We moved to another town the following week where she cut off contact with grandparents and started isolating me from everyone. I was on hard drugs and failing school within the year. I did end up living with my grandparents, but it wasn't until 4 years later after the damage had already been done. Story 7. A guy I knew killed his father in front of his mother and younger brother, trying to protect his mom from severe abuse. After he served his sentence, the family accepted him back and they've been living a normal life to this day. That started off really messed up but turned into something completely understandable. Glad they accepted him back. I can understand 100% how this kind of thing can happen. My mom and dad had a rocky relationship. My mom grew up in hell and she wanted her life a certain way, and my dad grew up believing that family should be like father knows best. despite his reality being a completely absurd opposite of that show. They had both suffered horrible abuse as children and started their adult lives as teenagers. Both married, got their own place, and were both remarried by 20 or 21 to each other. Just an example of what was normal to my dad, one time we were in a garage at my grandpa's working on a car. My brother and I were useless, but he wanted us to learn. My dad had been trying to stay sober for a few months and wasn't going around anyone who used other than his own father. His dad had a lug wrench in his hand and asked my dad to run down to Bobby's real quick and get me some of these things. My dad, who was instructed to call his dad by his first name, only said, "David, I'm trying to keep my family together and do the right thing. I really don't want to be around those." Before he even finished the sentence, my grandpa had him on the ground, beating him with that lug wrench. My dad could have killed him easily. He was bigger than him, meaner than him, and stronger than him. He stood up and my grandpa pointed down the road. My dad said, "I'm sorry, David, I'm going now." My mom lost her mother when she was only 4. Her mom took her own life with a pistol. After that, she never had a stable home and spent her entire childhood experiencing horrible abuse. Well, anyway, my mom had just had a hysterectomy and was lying in bed recovering. My dad came home from work and she demanded he let her check his breath for alcohol. He refused, and a heated argument ensued. She threw something at him and he grabbed a hold of the foot of the bed, screaming at her and shaking it. I saw her wailing in pain and blood started soaking through her shirt, where she had been stapled up. I looked down and saw a big metal makeup case, grabbed it by the handle and swung it with all my might. My dad was the intended target, but my mom raised up in bed about that time and I struck her in the head. He screamed, "Look at what you did to your mom!" I noticed a screwdriver sitting on the nightstand, grabbed it, and ran at him. I stabbed him probably 10 to 15 times with that dull thing before he managed to get me down and take it from me. I managed to break the skin through his clothes only a few times, but I think about how much different my life would be if it had been a knife or a gun lying there. As a young man, I hated my parents for all of that. As an adult, I know that those two did everything they could and never had the resources to be better. They divorced after multiple separations when I was 15, but they really did stick by each other until right before my dad died. My mom remarried after many years. After my ex and I separated, I moved back in with my mom temporarily 15 years later, and the old man was still there looking out for her, keeping her fire working on the property and keeping things up. They finally learned to regulate their emotions for the most part and didn't have an incident once in all of that time. It probably helped that they never felt obligated to the other romantically after that. They stayed close as friends, helped each other with my sister's kids, and when my mom couldn't deal with something he was doing, she'd just tell him to get lost for a couple of weeks. Until my mom started seeing her husband, he was always there. I'm sure he was upset about it, but he really didn't express it. My mom made her position clear, and he dated a few women here and there and would disappear when he did. It was a strange setup, that's for sure. They were two terribly neglected and abused children who found each other very early in life and had no idea how to handle the challenges of a family until they experienced it for themselves. They were great with the grandkids. My dad ultimately couldn't stay sober long enough for my mom to get romantic with him again, and that's usually why she'd run him off. They definitely loved each other and they definitely tried. Life ain't easy. That feels like my grandparents. My grandma literally went and disappeared herself for 3 years in the late 60s. My grandpa and the kids didn't know where she was, nor did her family. She could have been dead. My grandpa was abusive to her, neglectful and abusive to his children, left them in the care of abusers who didn't feed them, and he didn't feed them either when he had them during those years. When my grandma returned, they split up the kids. My grandpa remarried while my grandma had various boyfriends over the years, but by the time they got old, they pretty much did what their parents did. It was to the point where my grandpa's wife, who is still alive and loves my grandma, came over and would sit in the car while he would mow my grandma's lawn or do X work until my grandma told her to come inside and said she hadn't wanted him back in years. Story 8. When we were in school, this boy from our year, we were 13 years old or so at the time, was with his 2 older brothers and kidnapped a man. The man was dating their sister, and at that time, people were very protective if you dated someone's sister. They took him to a petrol station and covered him in petrol. They then took him to a forest and burnt him alive. All 3 brothers went to prison, but since they were minors, I don't think they got that many years. When I was 21 or 22, I bumped into the guy from my year in a takeaway, and he tells me he's working at the local supermarket. A few months later, I ended up working in that same supermarket, and he goes to me, "If anyone messes with you, let me know." I'm thinking, nah, I don't want them dead in a forest. No one really knows the finer details except those who are close to the family, I guess. We only heard the story in school. Was she being abused? Was the guy much older? This is back in 2002 or something. There used to be many P-words dating schoolgirls. There are many more stories I know where older men got beaten up for dating their much younger sisters. There's a guy from my building who is skinny and so tiny, he found a 32-year-old man dating his sister on a bus and started beating the crap out of him in public. His sister ended up running away with the man and got pregnant. The man left her after she gave birth. My ex-girlfriend's brother-in-law is from a small village in Mexico and went to school with a well-known narco in his region of the country. They were friends in grade school, and the guy became a cartel lord once her brother-in-law moved to the US in the 20s. He said that whenever he goes to visit his parents in the village, he sometimes runs into this narco and they chat and have drinks. He basically told him the same thing. If someone gives you a hard time, let me know, I'll handle it. This particular narco is apparently very violent and very feared by everyone in the region. Her brother-in-law always politely turns down his offer and tries to get out of there as quickly as he can. This is one of those places in Mexico where the cartel patrols the area, and if they see a vehicle they don't recognize, they'll pull you over and question you about what you're doing there and who you are. He tries to end the conversation and leave quickly because if there does happen to be a rival cartel member undercover in the area, that points a target on his back, since they tend to go for the friends and family of rival cartel members as an act of malice to get to the rival leaders. Story 9. My brother robbed a pizza guy twice. He called for a pizza in a park, and when the pizza man arrived, he pulled a knife on him. High on Xanax, I assume he went to sleep, woke up thinking it was a dream, and said, "Wow, that was a great idea, I better try it tonight." So he did the same exact thing, and the pizza guy came and hit him with a golf club. My brother absolutely deserved it. Pizza delivery guys are like holy saints of the modern world and shouldn't be touched or messed with. A friend of mine who used to manage a Domino's told me some crazy stories about driver experiences. He said that he had a driver who was being snuck up on by someone with ill intent. Somebody else saw it and tackled the dude, and dude's buddy piled on, and pretty soon, it was an 8-man dog pile. The original dude had a beef with this particular guy, but the others nearby saw it going down and stopped him from screwing with the pizza man. The pizza guy bolted when he saw what was going on, but his defenders all came to the store and explained what was about to go down and why they had started fighting, just to ask him to please keep delivering to that neighborhood because they had his back and wouldn't let anything happen to him. I knew 3 guys who decided to try this. Their plan was to order a pizza at their neighbor's place. Then when the pizza guy showed up, dude number 1 would deck him, dude number 2 would grab the pizzas, and dude number 3 would steal the car. When the pizza guy showed up, dude number 1 decked him. When the pizza guy pulled a telescoping club out of his jacket and started beating the crap out of dude number 1, all 3 of them ran off. When the cops showed up, the pizza guy said it was the 3 guys from Unit 207. I delivered to them all the time. Dude number 1 apparently did not have a good time in the county. I used to deliver pizza for Domino's back in the mid-80s while living in Norfolk, Virginia. It was like the Wild West. All of us were armed. The guy who trained me drove a Jeep with a shotgun strapped to his roll bar. We had drivers who were robbed, R-worded, a female driver was gang R-worded the week I started working there, and beaten. I carried a loaded .38 special in my glove box. Most drivers drank while working/driving. We had a handle of brass monkey in our cooler that anyone could take a pull off of between deliveries. No one gave a crap. Absolutely insane job. I lost count of how many times I was threatened, but no one ever robbed me. Only pulled my gun out twice. Good tips though. I got robbed twice when I delivered pizzas. One time I described the guy down to the color and pattern of his socks. A couple of hours later, the police called me down to the road to identify him before they actually arrested him. Small town. And I'm not kidding you, this guy was dressed exactly the same, only a bit heavier. I told the police that while this is incredibly ironic, this isn't the guy, and they should let him go. They respond, Well, that sucks because we just found some weed on him, so we're taking him anyway. This guy was standing on his grandma's porch, hanging out with family after a funeral earlier that day. He drove 4 hours to our town for the funeral and was going back home the next day. After they left with him, I stopped and spoke to his family. Small town, remember? About what happened and how the only reason they stopped to approach him was because I gave a description of someone that looked like him. They were devastated and I felt so horrible. I apologized profusely. I still feel terrible about that guy. They never even caught the guy that robbed me. Story 10. When I was a kid, I was in the hospital for some surgery. In the next bed over was a kid who was younger than me in a full-body cast. Turns out his dad was drunk and ran over him with the car. But that's not the worst part. His dad, apparently a hopeless alcoholic, later committed suicide. But that's not the worst part. A few years ago, I decided to look for the kid on the internet and see how he was doing. Turns out, he killed his wife with a chainsaw and then killed himself with a chainsaw. But that's not the worst part. Their 14-year-old son found them. That would mess you up for life. Story 11. Someone I was close friends with till college was R-wording his wife's daughters from their first marriage for years. He was also filming it and distributing the material, and was teaching other P-words, internet security, and how to use the dark web. A laptop involved in a sting in the UK undid all his careful trail covering. The investigation revealed over a decade of traceable data on his activities, building a CP criminal network. I don't like to think about it. I wish we lived in a society where people with these desires could get help before they act and destroy people's lives. Germany has had huge success with making it acceptable for child R-wordists and P-words to seek help and treatment to curb or stop their attractions before they act out. Makes so much more sense than waiting until some awful crap happens. But here in the US, these people won't reach out for help because they're scared of being found out, and the cycle continues. They bottle up their attractions until they're in a situation where they can act on them, some poor child gets R-worded, and everyone involved has their lives ruined. Makes total sense. It's just sadly not true for all of them. My FIL was one of the leading psychiatrists in my country before retiring. He spent decades treating these men while they were incarcerated, while also being head of the psychiatry department at a large hospital. According to him, there are roughly 2 categories of people with these kinds of urges. There's the ones you're referring to, which consists of people who are deeply ashamed and know that acting on these desires is unacceptable. But there's also the other category, which consists of people who don't believe that they're doing anything wrong, even after years in prison. They'll adamantly claim that they're innocent. According to them, the children are very much willing participants, and will even claim that the children are seducing the adults. They are very unlikely to seek help as they don't believe that they're actually sick. So while these programs definitely help, they are also very unlikely to solve the problem. Story 12. My mother tried to kill my father when I was a toddler by taping up the windows in our apartment. She turned on the gas at the stove, took me, and left. She knew my dad would light a cigarette upon returning home. She was banking on it. Luckily, my dad was able to smell the gas leaking under the door. My mom and dad were similar to my brother. They used roach bombs, though. My brother was in his 20s at the time, just employed with his first full-time job with benefits. Made my mom a beneficiary of life insurance. Literally the next week, they tried to kill his ass with raid. Why he didn't go to the police, I don't know. Abuser loyalty, I guess. He said they forgot he was home while somehow putting multiple bug bombs in his room where he was sleeping. An old neighbor in my 2-unit apartment tried that one on his girlfriend after a fight. He left the gas on and left. He knew she'd be smoking when she came through the door. A couple of days later, a relative came to pick up her stuff instead of her, and thankfully they figured it out quickly. He tried to kill her, but he would also have killed my wife and me. I stalked every known haunt of that man for months, hoping to find him. He never showed back up. I don't know if the police ever caught him. Story 13. One of my long-term employees was often late, claiming his neighbors had kept him up all night, or he was unwell with migraines, etc. My wife suffers from migraines, and we had crappy neighbors too, so I gave him the benefit of the doubt. One day he didn't show up and I couldn't get a hold of him. After a couple of hours, the police show up to tell me his place was raided at dawn, and they've arrested him for downloading and distributing child porn. Turns out he was spending all night doing that nasty crap and then showing up for work knackered, and I accepted his apologies and excuses for years because he was good at his job. This sounds like you blame yourself for not noticing. Please don't do that. So many people genuinely have issues they cannot control, and losing a job over it might ruin their lives. This person abused your trust. That's not on you. You showed kindness to someone who might have turned out to be scum, but if you weren't, you would have been a major hero for supporting them. Your kindness and trust are still a good thing, even if the person you trusted didn't deserve it. It doesn't diminish your humanity, it just speaks of the lack of theirs. Story 14. The guy I went to school with was really calm and very smart, and everyone loved him. He was a gentle person from what I can remember. He had lost his mom a couple of years before this. She was a nurse and they found her dead in a hospital room during her shift. Unknown causes. In our senior year of high school, the dude is a championship wrestler, dominating his grades and just doing good. He lived with his dad, who was a police officer for years and years. At lunch one day, he left school and came back. Everything was normal and the day was finished. His dad did not show up for work that evening, and the police department sent someone to go knock on his door. They found the house ransacked and his dad lying in bed with a single gunshot wound to the head, deceased. Later that night, they called my grandmother in for questioning because she cleaned their house once a week. Not much later than that, the guy I went to school with broke down and confessed that they had come home on lunch to ask for money, and he and his dad got into an argument. His dad laid down like normal for his shift, and he took his dad's service pistol and shot him. And after realizing what he'd done, he freaked out and turned the house upside down to make it look like a robbery. Then went and finished the day at school to try to make it seem like he had no clue what had happened. Shocked everyone. Thanks for watching until the end. If you have a similar story to these that you would like to share with us, please leave it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave us a like and subscribe. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again, and see you next time.